Welcome to Facebook Live. I'm Tom Schatz, president of Citizens Against Government Waste, and I'm very, very pleased to have the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Mac Thornberry of the 13th District of Texas, here with us today in the House Armed Services Committee hearing room. Citizens Against Government Waste has been working on defense reform since the creation of the organization following the report of the Grace Commission in 1984. The Grace Commission helped uncover and expose the $436 hammer and the $640 toilet seat. They recommended the establishment of an Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, which occurred in 1986, and also proposed the establishment of a Base Closing Commission, which occurred in 1988. CAGW has been pleased to work with Chairman Thornberry and the committee on acquisition reform and defense reform over the last several years. And I understand you now have another proposal that the committee is going to be considering and has considered and will be marked up and then hopefully voted on and brought into the floor of the House before Memorial Day. Could you please tell us what you have done in the last few Congresses and what this new proposal will do?
Well, a major priority of this committee has been reform at the Pentagon, as you mentioned. Part of that is to get more value for the taxpayers out of the money we spend, but part of it is to make the department more agile to deal with this wide array of national security threats that we have. So a lot of what we've done has been in acquisition reform, and we are grateful for all of the support of those efforts. Again, so that we can get more value, but also so that we can acquire technology and get it in the hands of the warfighter faster. Now, we've also, by the way, reformed the military retirement system. We have made reforms of the military healthcare system, a number of changes. What we're turning to this year is focused on what's called the fourth estate. And that is defense agencies that are not part of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. These largely supporting agencies that are part of the DoD complex that frankly Congress doesn't pay that much attention to. It's a lot more fun for us to climb around on planes and ships and stuff rather than go through warehouses or see a bunch of people working at computer terminals. But yet there's a lot of duplication, a lot of savings, a lot of agility to be gained by reforming that fourth estate.
In fact, the Government Accountability Office has had those aspects of DoD on their high-risk list for many years. And there have been a number of efforts in the past, the Packard Commission after the Grace Commission, the Klinger-Cohn Act. How would this be different, and how is the committee making sure that the Pentagon follows up on these efforts, both the ones you mentioned and the new efforts that are coming up?
Well, on the new efforts, we have a requirement that 25% savings occur from the covered activities. And if there can't be 25% savings that they do on their own, then we will enforce it ourselves. Now, that's not the best way to do it, but you have to have some sort of hammer to go with the goal that you set. I also outlined 7 of these different agencies that I suggest for elimination. Again, most of them are duplicative. They slow down decision making. And if there are essential functions, they can be transferred to other places. So the goal, again, is to put more capability into the hands of the warfighter. In defense, you often hear about the tail and the tooth. You know, the tail is what you're dragging behind you that are costs. The tooth are the warfighters out in front risking their lives to protect this nation. They have to be our first priority.
So the fourth estate includes the intelligence agencies. Would they be subject to that 25% reduction as well?
No, we explicitly say the intelligence agencies, Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, et cetera, are not part of what we're trying to do. Now, I'm not saying there are not improvements that can be made in all parts of DoD or all government, but we're really focused on these duplicative organizations and savings that can be achieved by either eliminating redundancy.
So contract administration, the Grace Commission also recommended consolidating all the contract administration in one place, because I know there's the Defense Logistics Agency, Defense Contract Management Agency. How would they be affected by your plan?
Well, we do something specifically on the Defense Logistics Agency. We require that that the cost of the products they provide be reduced at least 10%, because it's the Air Force or the Army that have to pay those costs. And yet DLA has had a real problem in keeping up with the change in logistics. I mean, you think about the way Amazon or Walmart or private business does it. DLA is a long way from that. They will never be exactly like a private business, but there's all sorts of automation and best practices that can really improve their efficiency and also their ability to get things to the warfighter faster. Now, we do ask the new management officer at the Department of Defense to look at the contract organizations you mentioned. There's the Defense Contract Management Agency, the Defense Contract Audit Agency, and Defense Finance, I can't even remember, DFAS. There gets to be so many of them, it's hard to keep track. We asked them to look at all of those agencies, maybe with an eye towards consolidate. We don't mandate that, but again, to reduce the overhead, consolidate duplicative functions so that you can have a leaner, more agile organizational structure.
How does the Pentagon, Secretary Mattis, feel about all of this? Are they with you? Are they making some other recommendations?
We'll see. Yeah. I think initially they are supportive of the thrust of the reforms I propose. They have not really had time to say, yes, we're for that provision and against that one. But I think in a broader sense, Secretary Mattis understands that Congress gave the Defense Department a pretty big budget increase this year, but most of that budget will go towards fixing the things that we have, our planes and ships and training that has been neglected for so many years. So that if he's looking ahead at the defense budget, he knows he's going to have some greater efficiencies in other parts of the defense budget to invest in the new technologies we need for Russia, China, Iran, and all of those threats that we face. So he is very supportive of reforms that enable us to put more resources into the hands of the warfighter. And we will work through the details with him to see see how that works.
So in these other countries that are essentially dictatorships, Putin can say do this, and in China they can say do that, and they just do it. So how long does it take to get the things done now? For example, getting an order through or getting a contract done. I saw somewhere in one of your reports there were 36 different agencies that have to even look at approving a senior executive service employee. It seems a little crazy, but I think most people outside of Washington don't even understand how the complexities make it more difficult to achieve our ultimate goal of protecting national security.
Oh, it is a major problem. As a matter of fact, a number of defense experts will say time is limiting us even more than money right now. And so, just to take an example, in the Fourth Estate we're talking about, there are 3 different agencies that have to sign off if you want to hire a civilian at the Department of Defense. And what happens is they get to feuding with each other, or they get to negotiating with each other about, I'll give you this person if you give me that person. But the effect of that is it takes months and months to get somebody hired. Now, if you think about the kind of expertise we need, whether it's a computer expert or an expert in some field of science or a management expert. They have so many more opportunities in the private sector, not only to make more money, but to get a decision made. And then the rest of the story is if you go to work for the Department of Defense, you have to wait for a background check to make sure your security clearance comes through. And that is taking, in some cases, 2 years to get done. So it affects our ability to attract and retain the best people that our country has to offer, in addition to allowing those people to make decisions when, as you point out, Putin or President Xi just gives an order and it happens like that.
Is that one of the reasons there were so many contractors hired by the Pentagon? It's just easier to find a contractor, despite the fact that CAGW and other groups have supported the idea of more private and government competition to determine whether the government or the private sector can do something better. And when you look at how the Fourth Estate is composed, it would seem to me there would be a lot more contractors, clearly, than in the other parts of the military. So that may help in terms of getting your colleagues to agree to make some of these changes?
Well, I think it's a great point. Sometimes out of frustration, contractors are hired in order just to get something done. But then it goes back to what you were talking about a while ago. Do we have the appropriate management over those contracts to make sure that the taxpayers really get value for it? Clearly, there are some things we want government people to do, some things we want contractors to be able to do. There are advantages to both, but a lot of times it's that management decision on which makes sense for whom that we're not very good at.
Right. The audit.
Yeah.
CAGW and many other organizations, taxpayer groups have been calling for an audit of the DoD. In fact, CAGW and the Grace Commission recommended the establishment of chief financial officers, which Congress agreed to in 1989, Government Performance and Results Act in 1995, and every other agency has had an audit, a clean audit, except DoD. And so every year it seems that they are saying, we're going to do it. We got it. We're doing the Marines. We're doing something. And where are they on all of this?
This year, which is fiscal year 2018, the Department of Defense will be audited for the first time. And I think it's very important that organizations such as yours, but also this committee, have really held their feet to the fire and say, we're going to do it, even though we know it'll be ugly. What we know is the results of that audit will be, it will not be a clean audit. We've got problems here, problems there, but that's the reason to do an audit, to shine a light on those problems so that they can be addressed and you'll be better next year. So this year, for the first time ever, the Department of Defense will be audited.
So we're going to find all those missing planes that aren't really missing.
Yeah.
I think people hear
but
that
just
and
in the wrong ledger account or
Right.
something.
Right.
Well, what we're also going to find, I predict, is a number of IT systems that don't talk to each other.
Exactly.
That's been one of the big holdups in an audit, that so much technology has been stovepiped at the department, and one system cannot talk to another, and so things do fall off the radar screen. This is, I think, a major step towards fixing those issues.
Well, and that was one of the other things that the Grace Commission noted, was the lack of compatibility for information systems, for accounting systems, financial systems, and certainly at the Pentagon, which has done a tremendous job of defending the country. These things have really fallen by the wayside or fallen behind. There's a litany of stories about how IT projects have not kept up with modern technology. There are vacuum tubes in some of these agencies still, the IRS being the latest example, where on tax day their system failed, everybody got an extra day. How many of those things are true at the Pentagon? How many old systems are there, for example, in nuclear, warfare and other areas?
No,
that
it's a great example you just mentioned. Nuclear command and control has not kept up with changes in technology. And the truth is, there are probably more instances of outdated technology at the Department of Defense than any of us would like to acknowledge or be comfortable with. So it's interesting. So many things have been recommended in the past, and you mentioned the Grace Commission. I think we are finally getting some traction to address many of those things that a lot of us would say is just common sense. And it will not be easy, because while we're updating IT systems and all of that, we still have to defend the country, or they are still defending the country against terrorism and all the other threats that we've dealt with. But we're seeing more progress partly out of necessity, because we cannot afford to have a big stovepipe bureaucracy when the threats against us are moving at, literally in some cases, the speed of light.
So we talked about the Secretary's support or just interest where they might be in terms of the reforms. How about your colleagues on the committee, particularly Democrats, who in general don't like spending money on defense, but you do seem to have pretty good bipartisanship for the National Defense Authorization Acts over the years. That's a very good tradition in the House and Senate, that eventually they all get together and agree about what should be done and what should be spent. In terms of the acquisition reforms, is there resistance? Is it a jobs issue like it is for so much else that goes on here?
Occasionally you'll see some resistance based on jobs. A lot of what we've done, though, has had bipartisan support, because I think people see the necessity of that. And the effort to rebuild the military has also been largely bipartisan, because For example, a study came out a couple weeks ago that found the number of aircraft mishaps has been up 40% since 2013. So that's not a partisan issue. We've had a lot of agreement. Now, when I start talking about eliminating agencies and cutting the Fourth Estate functions by 25%, of course there's resistance. And so I'm not blind to what may be coming. But on the other hand, as long as we keep the focus on the warfighter on the front lines, then we can do pretty well. It's when we're just focused on the back home jobs, et cetera, that we sometimes lose our way in doing the right thing for the country.
How has the Department of Defense responded to the oversight that your committee has been conducting? Because I know you've honestly done a very, very good job of that, and it's really Congress's essential function to conduct oversight hearings that focus on how they're spending the money, not on politics or, who's doing what or anything along those lines, which unfortunately occurred for 8 years under President Obama. But again, we appreciate what you've done. But what are they doing in response?
Well, I have to say, I think that there is a different tone now than there was in the previous administration when it comes to our oversight. Now, I'm not going to say that they like it always, because it is kind of like somebody grading your homework. But on the other hand, I do think most of the leadership in the Department of Defense, many of whom have not been partisan before, who have been people with a business background, or in Secretary Mattis's case, a military background, they see us more as partners. And we can accomplish so much more with that sort of mindset if we're going the same direction as I think we largely are. But I think the point you raise is very important. Constitution under Article 1, Section 8 says it's Congress's job to raise and support, provide and maintain the military forces of the United States. It's not to just acquiesce to whatever a president asks for. That's our job. And so we have to make sure that we do our homework, we know what we're talking about, but we also get the answers that are necessary for us to do that job under the Constitution.
So taxpayers should feel comforted, I think, that you're doing this. As I said, we always appreciate it. Anything else that the committee is going to be doing or plans to do, not just in reform, but in other areas related to national security?
Well, I would say our two primary focuses are rebuild, which means repair and fix things, and then reform. We're never going to finish either job, but especially on the reform side, we're going to have to make the Department of Defense be more agile if we're going to continue to protect the nation in the coming years.
Right. Well, the Grace Commission recommended that every agency not work like a business, but with an eye towards efficiency and effectiveness and carrying out the mission that the Congress gives them, because far too often we see agencies running rampant and not paying attention, and Congress not conducting oversight. And I think it's critically important in national security that every penny be spent wisely, because it really is the most important constitutional function of the U.S. Congress.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's the first job of the federal government to defend the country. And so overseeing how those dollars are spent, but also ensuring that we can make decisions promptly at the speed, at the pace the world events demand. I think that's the other real focus of our reform efforts. And we'll never be perfect, so that just means we'll have to stay after it.
Right. Well, again, we're in a global, always in a global war of some kind, or conflict, I guess is a better word. Yeah. And to stay up and keep up with where we have been as the world's most prominent superpower, we do need to keep doing these things. So again, we really appreciate your leadership. Thank you again for joining us on Facebook Live with Citizens Against Government Waste in this lovely House Armed Services Committee room. And keep up the good work.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.